who had been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years, came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, if I only can touch his garment, I shall get well. But Jesus turned and seeing her, said, Daughter, take courage, your faith has made you well. And all at once the woman was made well. I want to deal today with the lady, the woman. She's had an issue of blood for 12 years. The Leviticus 15 tells us something very specifically about her. Number one is that if she had that issue of blood, for 7 days, she was restricted from any individual, from being with them or touching them, or even sit where they sit. So this lady, for 12 years, has had this problem. And as she's had this problem, she's suffering from being isolated, from being able to get close to anybody. And that's difficult. That's like isolation. Friends and family were prevented from being close to her, or they would be unclean. She'd gone and taken all of her money and spent it on trying to get well. Now, in the law of Moses, there were ways in which they were to approach their healing. But in the Talmud, there were many things that there were 12 things that they were to do to get well. And you wouldn't believe half of them. They were gross. I won't go there. I will keep it a little bit more cheerful than trying to think of all the different ways that they were supposed to get well from having an issue of blood. So she spent all of her money. Now, if you get the Sea of Galilee area, Capernaum is up at the northern west corner, and on the far side there are some hot springs. They were hot springs often used to get people well. As you can see in our days, people go for rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. They would sit there in those springs. These individuals would go and try to, this is where the doctors, the self-probably appointed doctors, we would almost call them the witchcraft, the physicians of low esteem, would sit there and they would take these people's money and they tell them to do this and tell them to do that. And after all this time, she spent all of her money. She had no left. And the closest town for a Jew to go to would be Capernaum across the lake. To go to Tiberias would be difficult because when they went to Tiberias, that was a Roman city and it's an unclean city, and they couldn't go there. So they probably took her in a boat, dumped her out in Capernaum, and she sees Jesus. Interesting what it says. She says to herself, if I can touch the fringe of his garment, I will be well. Well, I brought to you today a tallit, a prayer shawl. This tallit is specifically designed, and it has importance throughout the material. You can see the blue. It was required that the blue strand would go through the garment and then come out through the tassels. But during the process of time, God told them a certain way in which to get this blue thread, and they don't know exactly what blue thread it was, and so they didn't put them in the tassels after a while. You can see they have knots in the tassels. These have 5 knots here. They have 5 knots here. Each knot would remind them not only of grace, but also of 613 commandments that they were to obey. So when they took the tallit, you can see the decorations on the collar, they would kiss it, and then they would take it and put it on, and then they would cover their head, their eyes, but not their mouths. so that when they got together, this is their prayer closet. They got together with God in their prayer closet, and they worshiped Him. Now, when a rabbi was going around the area of the country, he would wear his tallit, and he would bring it up in such a way in which he could have his arms free. So you can imagine that Jesus is walking along. As he's walking along, the back fringe of his garment, the tassel, that represents, once you put this tallit on, you represent that you are separated from the world and you're alone with God. The closest way in which she could get to Jesus and not touch him was to touch his prayer shawl, his tallit. And as she reached up to touch the fringe of his garment, she was healed. Now, when she was healed, Jesus knew from Luke's account, Jesus felt the power leave him. And he turned around. And he said, "Who touched me?" And the apostle said, "Master, there's all kinds of people here. I mean, how do we know who touched you?" He says, "Someone touched me. I felt the power leave." In this scripture, he looks at the lady and he says, "Your faith has made you whole. Go in peace." The interpretation for peace here is go in prosperity. The money that you spent, go in prosperity so that you may replenish what you've lost. As this lady is touching the fringe of Jesus' garment, something comes very specifically into play here. Malachi, the last book that Vinny gave us of the Old Testament, Malachi, the 4th chapter, and the 2nd verse says to us,